Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be in the world. My name is Chuck Lennox with the Global Alliance for Heritage Interpretation. I want to welcome you to our webinar series today, Global Excellence in Heritage Interpretation. The Global Alliance is an umbrella organization of international interpretive groups around the world who are working together to support the growth of heritage interpretation as a profession and support the professional development of interpreters. I'd like to thank Time Looper and Agents of Discovery for their support of our translation service. In closing, I'd like to remind you that interpretation is a seed, not a tree. Let's plant some more seeds. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the webinar today.
Hello, I'm Beth Moravon, Chair of the Association for Heritage Interpretation, a UK membership organisation for natural and cultural heritage interpreters. I'm delighted to be part of the Global Alliance for Heritage Interpretation Steering Committee and welcome you to our webinar series, Global Excellence in Heritage Interpretation. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello, bonjour. My name is Sarah Rao and I am the Vice Chair for Interpretation Canada. We are a community that recognizes, celebrates, debates, and inspires heritage interpretation in Canada, and we are thrilled to be taking part in the GAHI webinar series. We hope you enjoy.
Hi, I'm Kylie Christian, President of Interpretation Australia, and I'm really glad to welcome you to the Global Alliance for Heritage Interpretation's webinar series. We love being part of it, and we hope you love it too.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings to you all. My name is Nick, and I am the chair of the Interpretation Network of New Zealand. We are a network designed to bring together interpretation professionals and showcase the best practice happening around our beautiful country of Aotearoa, New Zealand. Please enjoy this webinar from our international colleagues in the Global Alliance of Heritage Interpretation. Kia ora.
Hello, I'm Helena Vicic, and I'm representing Interpret Europe, a European Association for Heritage Interpretation. We're very excited about this opportunity of sharing excellence across the world. We're digging up knowledge here in Europe that can have a potential to inspire colleagues from other continents. And vice versa, the inspiration in the Global Alliance is guaranteed to come back. Global Alliance of Heritage Interpretation with the webinar series is a treasure box of inspiration and good practice that promotes high standards of heritage interpretation globally.
Hi there, I am Paul Caputo, Executive Director for the National Association for Interpretation. We serve 6,000 heritage interpreters in the United States. We are thrilled to be one of the organizing partners of the Global Alliance for Heritage Interpretation year-long free webinar series. Enjoy!
Greetings from the Global Alliance for Heritage Interpretation. We're very excited to welcome you to our second webinar this year in our series, Global Excellence in Heritage Interpretation, today hosted by the Association for Heritage Interpretation in Great Britain. Today's webinar is New Paradigms in Interpretation, How Stories Can Change the World in a Changing World. For those of you who speak Spanish, at the very bottom of the screen in interpretation button, if you click on there, this webinar will be translated into Spanish for your viewing pleasure. If you have any questions, please, during this webinar, please put them in the question box and we'll answer those questions at the end of the talk. Let me pass the screen over to my colleagues from the Association for Heritage Interpretation, Jim Mitchell, to introduce our speaker.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Jim Mitchell from AHI, so Association for Heritage Interpretation in Great Britain and Ireland. And just before I introduce our fantastic speaker tonight, Eric, I'd just like to say a little bit about AHI's ethos, just to get us in the mood, I suppose. So AHI believes that interpretation enriches our lives through engaging emotions, enhancing experiences, and deepening understanding of places, people, events, and objects from the past and the present. We aim to promote excellence in the practice and provision of interpretation and to gain wider recognition of interpretation as a professional activity. And that's why we are so excited to do that this evening with an international audience of interpreters. So I'm really just here to introduce our main speaker, Eric, who I've known for a long time, and we met at Museums and Heritage Show many years ago. And my role has been as a trustee with AHI. I'm now a fellow of that organization, and Eric is a fellow trustee and global interpreter. So Eric, would you like to join the screen? And I can welcome you. Eric's internationally recognized as a planner of new museums and cultural projects. He oversees all of Barker Langham's creative and visitor experience work, and his expertise encompasses the interpretation, direction, and curation of groundbreaking cultural projects across the globe. Eric, welcome. How are you feeling?
Great, thanks. Very good. Very excited about tonight. Yeah.
It's good to see you and to have this audience of international interpreters. So it's a fascinating topic you've got for us tonight, new paradigms in interpretation, how stories can change the world. And what I'm really hoping is we can have some chat going on, and I can ask you some questions from that after your presentation. So for everybody out there, please do put those messages in the chat right from now or all the way through to the end, and I will be monitoring those, and then I'll be asking those to Eric on your behalf after Eric's presentation. So Eric, over to you then with your presentation, and I'll see you in a bit.
Perfect. Thanks, Jim. Thanks for the kind introduction. I'm just going to share the screen, get my presentation up for you all. And then I'll get going. So just to sort of, today's talk is actually going to be in 3 parts. The first part, I'm going to talk about interpreters' responsibility to harness the transformative power of stories. Secondly, I'm going to talk about how we, interpreters, can capture people's attention in a sort of increasingly loud world. And finally, I'm going to introduce new ways of thinking about interpretation. But I think first, a bit of an introduction to myself. I'm Eric Langham, founder of a cultural practice, Barker Langham. We work on transformational cultural projects all across the world. I'm also a trustee for the Migration Museum in the UK, and also, as Jim mentioned, for the Association of Heritage Interpretation. And it's through AHI that I've been invited to speak at this webinar on excellence in interpretation. So great to be here. So I think for me, there's sort of 2 clear kind of linked paths when I'm thinking about excellence. The first is, I think we need to kind of understand the power of storytelling, because to me, kind of stories do have this transformative power to captivate, to convince, to embolden. And secondly, I think that it's interpreters' responsibility to kind of harness this power in some way, to create experiences that foster empathy, that inspire action. And in this talk, I'm going to explore how stories, if well told, do have the power to change people, places, and even the planet. I'm going to start with people. So what sort of cultural experiences could transform a person? And how do museums and cultural institutions create these experiences? I think there's 2 parts to this. The first part, I think you need to show your audience why something matters. Give them the opportunity to kind of respond to that, to think, to feel, even act differently. It's a kind of journey that starts with empathy, develops into understanding, culminates with action. And to illustrate this, I'd like to tell you about a really powerful project based around a singular idea. It's kind of a real fusion of story and design. It's a project that won an AHI Best Interpretation Award and a Red Dot Best of the Best Design Award. And I think that's quite pertinent that it won, it's renowned for both its design and its interpretation, and it's kind of fusing of both of them. Blink, The End is in Sight was an exhibition for the charity Sight Savers. It opened in London at the Oxo Gallery in October 2019. This exhibition aimed to create awareness about the horrific disease trachoma, which is a bacterial infection which, left untreated, means every blink of your eye brings you closer to irreversible blindness. The big idea of the exhibition was to get the audience to reflect on what it actually means to blink yourself blind by creating this kind of real-life experience of fading sight. To do this, we asked well-known photographers to choose a work that captured the last image that they would hope to see before they went blind. And each photo on display was fitted with tracking technology so that every time a viewer blinked whilst viewing that particular image, a kind of mechanical actuator moved across the artwork, permanently destroying part of it, pixel by pixel. And during the run of the exhibition, these artworks were gradually destroyed just by the gaze of the visitors, one blink at a time. This kind of completely immersed the audiences in this kind of the devastating effect of trachoma and broke down the kind of barriers that are normally present between audiences and the message, creating this kind of powerful dialogue between the two. And for me, this is was a really transformative moment. It's really about creating experiences that kind of get you right here in your hearts. But I also think that kind of transformative experiences like this are not just an end in themselves. They're a sort of means to an end. They're part of a process. And that's a theme I'm going to keep returning to in the course of this presentation today. So I hope you can see how a cultural experience could transform the people who encounter them. But could actually an experience transform a place? Could it help shape a nation's view of itself? I think the answer is very definitely. And it's certainly something that happened all over Europe, for instance, in the 18th and 19th century, with the founding of so many kind of national museums and galleries. These institutions represented and reinforced this kind of sense of nationhood by showcasing traditions, styles, knowledge of a place, or, to be honest, in many cases, a place, collection, and history that may not have actually belonged to them. But in so doing, they kind of helped define a nation physically and conceptually, showcasing its position in the world, its geographical outlook, its kind of idea of itself. And in a way, you can view these kind of institutions as the nation's biographer, collating, curating, selecting the local or global perspectives that it wishes to project. And probably like many biographers, they kind of shape a nation's identity by deciding what matters, deciding the communities who could be part of the story, and invariably omitting some stories and communities. So I would say that kind of museums and memorials, even today, help nations to unify their communities, position their identities, define their limits, compose their biographies. I'm going to tell you about a project that we worked on in the Arabian Gulf, which kind of we helped plan, curate, and interpret along with the museum team. The nation of Qatar, probably very well known in terms of hosting the recent World Cup, became an independent state in 1971. It thinks big, sees itself as a kind of regional powerhouse and a global player. And to mirror this ambition, Qatar developed its new national museum between 2009 and 2019. And the museum that you can see here, sort of in the image in front of you, embraces a historic palace. In 1975, it was actually this palace that opened its doors to the first national museum in the whole of the Gulf region. But the new museum, which you can see here embracing the palace, is a spectacular structure. It was developed by the renowned architect Jean Nouvel, and its kind of dramatic shape was inspired by the desert rose, which is a sort of beautiful rock crystal that forms in the desert of Arabia. The new mega museum kind of articulates Qatar's ambition to create a sense of nationhood. Its physical presence signals Qatar's sort of global aspiration, yet it's very replete with kind of local resonance. And I think it's this juxtaposition of the past and the future, the kind of futuristic structure, which you can see here, framing the historic palace, that's a real fitting symbol for Qatar today. And kind of ambition on this scale brought loads of success. It opened in March 2019 to huge global publicity. In the first 3 months, 250,000 people came to visit, which is about 10% of Qatar's population. It won multiple awards and accolades. It featured in Time magazine's top 100 greatest places of 2019. And the New York Times simply wrote, skip the Vatican City, go to the National Museum of Qatar. But I think you need to go kind of inside the museum to understand how it's shaping the ideas of the nation, things I touched on a bit earlier. The museum itself, when you go inside, tells the story of Qatar from 700 million years ago to today, through exhibits that cover natural history, archaeology, anthropology, social and modern history, and politics. It's laid out in 11 interconnected, free-flowing galleries. And in each gallery, they're introduced by these spectacular immersive art films. You can see some of them here, sort of projected on the museum's angular sloping walls. And these films themselves are illustrative and poetic meditations on Qatar's story. One film, for example, tells the story of the unification of Qatar. Another evokes the physical and emotional challenges of pearl diving. This museum isn't a world treasury, it's unashamedly Qatari. The galleries are filled with maps and models of Qatar, a constant reminder of its boundaries and geography. The physical artifacts are almost all from or about Qatar, either created or found in Qatar or intrinsically linked to it. But what really unifies this museum are the oral histories, the voices of the Qataris themselves. These interviews can be found in every gallery, and they really set the tone. This museum is about the people of Qatar in their own words. And together, the films and the oral histories kind of vividly capture the dynamism of Qatari culture. The result is almost like a journey that takes you through a three-dimensional oral history. And as interpreters, we work really closely with the museum team and with local experts to shape not only this story, but the museum as an institution. And it's the narrative that was developed that helped steer the development of the actual museum collection. You know, so in effect, our work and the collective work of the museum team has helped and is helping shape the idea of this young nation, instilling pride, unifying individuals, defining boundaries, and articulating histories. But it's important to remember that this is a snapshot in time. Museums and nations are always work in progress, and over time, storylines will change. But I think what is important for us as interpreters is that we are highly influential. We always have been, whether you call us curators, interpreters, or whatever, in the way nations are imagined and presented, both to ourselves and to others. So now, probably for our biggest challenge, or one of our, a bigger challenge anyway, is how can the cultural projects that we develop transform our planet? Can the work we do really inspire a change for all humanity, or is this just utopian thinking? I'm going to start with a real life example. Last year, I was listening to an amazing interview, a radio interview with the physicist Brian Greene. And Greene is renowned for his groundbreaking discoveries in superstring theory. It's one of the best attempts to explain the sort of the universe in a way, in a single coherent theory. So this is pretty important stuff. And in the interview, he described how he grew up in New York, just across the street from the Hayden Planetarium. And he said this was the place that first inspired him to look up in the stars and ask questions. Well, today he's changing the way we understand the universe. And I think those early experiences also inspired him to write, science books. He said, many science papers are written, but only a few make a major impact. But on the other hand, a popular science book kids can read and connect with, can have a massive impact and can inspire the next generation. I think Greene's comment here, and this is what it sort of really struck me, showed how we can transform the planet by both, individual and kind of collective change. We can inspire individuals to be curious, to ask questions, to pursue goals which may push humanity onto new horizons. But we can also inspire kind of collective change. Cultural practitioners, scientists, educators can share our planet's beauty, stories, and challenges, inspiring us all to react. So I'd sort of say for every kind of superstring theoretician, we might inspire we can also inspire thousands of ordinary people to become custodians of our planet's natural and cultural heritage. So I'd like to talk you through a project now that does just that. It links kind of big questions relating to the universe with a fresh new curatorial team, and that's a team made up of local children. The Seas That Went to Space was an exhibition at Catalyst Science Centre in Widnes in the UK. And this exhibition tells the story of a sapling grown from a pip collected from Isaac Newton's favourite apple tree. Several pips were taken into space by Tim Peake, the first British astronaut to visit the International Space Station. And 8 saplings were grown from these pips and awarded to institutions across the UK to care for. So in a way, we were sharing this kind of amazing story of gravity, space and horticulture to inspire the next generation of scientists. And the exhibition welcomed one of these space saplings into its new home in the Science Centre. So as interpreters, we all started thinking about a hook, a kind of idea to inspire our approach. And I think one day with our team and with the client team, someone came up with the idea that, you know, the first person to walk on Mars is probably in primary school right now. And kind of that was it. That kind of resonated in some way. The idea that the first person from Mars could be one of our school-age visitors became a starting point. Imagine creating an exhibition that could inspire that level of ambition in its young visitors. So we actually decided to develop an exhibition working alongside a group of 10-year-old children from a local school in a disadvantaged area. In the first workshop, the children helped pick out the most interesting parts of the space sapling story to them. Second workshop involved visiting Catalyst, and then they formed these teams to build these kind of 3D models that you can see here to showcase visions of what the exhibition should look like. And in a final workshop, the children were invited to create booklets, which became part of the exhibition. They contained stories, poems, illustrations, and they had a real sort of space within this exhibition. And after the final workshop, which was, you know, super successful, I remember the children asked, is our work really going to be used? And is this exhibition really going to happen? Well, a few months later, they were invited to the exhibition to see how they'd influenced, in fact, helped shape the design. And we kind of hoped that through engaging children in this really creative way, we didn't only introduce them to this awe-inspiring story of scientific history, but also to a different approach to science in which kind of storytelling, art and teamwork are really key, inspiring the next generation in some way. I'd like to sort of add one more project actually here with the potential to change the planet. And it's one that I think is really transformative to me. In early 2021, we entered a competition to reimagine a museum for climate action. We chose to do something different. Our idea was that every object can tell the story of humanity's impact on the planet. And every museum or cultural institution has the power to be a voice for climate action. So instead of like one single climate museum, you can have thousands of museums all telling this story. Our museums and cultural landmarks could in a way work collectively to reimagine our places, to reimagine our collections in the context of the global environmental crisis. And as part of this concept, we made a film where we interviewed museum professionals and cultural experts from all around the world. And our contributors included District 6 Museum in Cape Town, the Brooklyn Museum, the National Museum of Vanuatu, European House of History, and many more. And at each museum, we heard stories of environmental impact and people's changing relationship and effects on the world. By sharing these stories and by highlighting the inspiring ways museum professionals are working to protect the planet, to nurture the future. Our belief was that if museums can work together globally, we can build a compelling narrative of Earth in the age of humans and perhaps even influence its ending. It's a bold idea, and the film and subsequent graphic novel we created were shown at COP26, the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow in 2021. I think for me, the project worked on many levels. We told the stories of our planet and what humans are doing to it. We made suggestions about improving our practice, both as cultural professionals, but also importantly as members of society. But I think the most profound impact this project had was the collection of people we brought together, a kind of network of cultural professionals, curators, interpreters, all engaging and conversing on this issue. This coming together of people from across the globe was, for me, truly transformative. And it really showed me that this transformation is a process and a means rather than an end. And it really did show me the power of culture to change the world by shaping our future. So I think our ambition is to change people, places, and the planet. But to achieve these things, I think we also need to be aware of this kind of wider context in which our work as interpreters will be operating. And the fact is, I think we're all competing for attention in this really increasingly loud world. Media outputs from gaming to television are becoming more interactive and immersive. You go down the shops, they're curated these days. Art's experienced immersively, and huge franchises from Stranger Things to ABBA to Doctor Who have all produced these amazing multimedia experiences. Curating's become this kind of personal obsession. It reaches every corner of our lives. We ourselves, we collect, we edit, we narrate our own existence. So much so that for many, the sort of distinction, I suppose, between real life and how we present ourselves to others or even ourselves has become blurred. And I think there's a blurring going on at the moment in interpretation. Traditional sites of national, personal, and cultural storytelling, such as memorials, museums, galleries, national parks, have been joined by films and theatres and soundscapes and architectural interventions. Spaces, media, and technology now bleed into each other, giving rise to new forms of narrative production and identity formation. You know, a museum these days can be a laboratory, an exhibition a site of political protest, a historic landmark, a space for artistic experiment. And I think in all of this, the role of the interpreter has become much more blurry and in constant flux. We're no longer tied to these strict informational hierarchies and outmoded learning theories. We're free to explore new social agendas and radical creative methodologies. So how do we make the most of this new freedom? How do we deliver on what I see as the responsibility of interpretation to harness its potential, to better confront the challenges of our time? And probably most crucially, how do we capture people's attention and imagination in this increasingly loud world? The answer, I'll say, is simple, but it's probably not easy to achieve. But I think that as interpreters, we must create experiences that can be found anywhere else. Experiences that evoke moments of awe, that address complex and contested narratives, that tell the untold and kind of take visitors on these kind of epic narrative journeys. As an example of what I mean, I'd like to talk to you about a project at Dubai Expo, which was the sort of World Expo in 2020 in the UAE. The Mobility Pavilion was devoted to mobility, one of the 3 signature themes of Dubai Expo. It's a very kind of abstract concept, mobility. It's quite hard to grasp, probably quite hard to visualize. It includes not just the different ways we move, but also the kind of human desire to keep moving, the aspiration to work together to improve our lot in life. And inside the pavilion, visitors go on this kind of immersive journey that visits key moments in the evolution of mobility. It's a journey that takes you from a kind of Bedouin village to all the way to Mars, the very journey the UAE itself has made in the last 50 years. And along the way, you meet 3 giants of mobility. And I mean, literally, they are giants. They're kind of 9 meter tall. You can see them here. They were made by Weta Workshop, who from New Zealand. So if there's anyone from New Zealand here, I saw them in the introduction. Weta Workshop created many of the props for the Lord of the Ring films. And here you can see 3 incredible characters, the 11th century historian al-Bakri, the 13th century explorer Ibn Battuta, and the 15th century navigator Ibn Majid. And all these were pioneers who looked beyond their own horizons and whose innovations kind of helped pave the way for the technology we use today. And after this, we move to the present. We see how billions of products are transported across the globe We immerse visitors in the world of big data and AI, and our journey then into the future, and we visit a base on Mars, a kind of new extraterrestrial colony. And while this storyline might appear really fantastical, the pavilion carefully brings all the elements to life. Big, complex issues are explained and communicated by individual characters and personal stories. Furthermore, the UAE and the Arab world provide the story framework and the setting, rooting the narrative in the region. It's an epic, multimodal journey, combining storytelling, models, theatre sets, film and art in a unique way, with moments of awe to excite and reward visitors. Instead of what could have been a very kind of traditional narrative about the history of mobility, the Dubai Expo Pavilion became a transformational exhibit about creating utopias in the stars and in our minds, really. At this point, I think it's probably worth looking at back at a history of what we mean by narrative, because I sort of say it a lot in here and kind of unpicking that. And I think it helps to explain why I think storytelling can often feel a little bit dead in many heritage places. So Freeman Tilden, who many of you will be familiar with, is the founding father of heritage interpretation. And in his 1957 book, Interpreting Our Heritage, he advocated the idea of using themes and messages to shape our interpretive storytelling. He also advocated an approach where we don't lose sight of the big picture, keeping a story at the heart of any project. Post Tilden, so many planners and probably so many of our plans readily adopted a thematic approach to telling stories as the best way visitors could begin to understand and be educated about collections, places, ideas. This kind of educative role of the interpreter, setting the interpreter up as a kind of expert, the one with the knowledge, revealing meaning to audiences, the ones without knowledge. This mindset, to me, loses a bit of the big picture. This type of kind of thematic thinking, in some ways, feels simply like a kind of new incarnation of Victorian object classification. My problem with it is this: as we create and classify our themes, we lose sight of the big picture, the connections. Encouraging storytelling, it kind of boxes it in, and any semblance of narrative left in the exhibition falls to the scriptwriter or the designer, who must start to join the dots that the interpreter or curator has lost. If you believe, as I do, that the role of interpretation is to forge connections between people and ideas, then your approach will be different. We should be using our power as interpreters to identify and articulate stories, to hide the hidden and the extant, the tangible and the intangible. We should be using our power as interpreters to communicate complex, perhaps even conflicting narrative in compelling ways. We should be using our power as interpreters to share what we know, but also we must invite visitors to share what they know, because they are rarely without knowledge. And we should be using our power as interpreters to foster identity and even to inform and change policy. So for me, interpretation is very much about creating these emotional and intellectual connections between visitors and a story, an idea or object. And one way to do this is to challenge or provoke visitors. So let me try this one on you. In the UK, there are more statues of men called John than there are statues of real-life non-royal women. Now, that's a pretty shocking fact, I know, but it's also pretty memorable. And it got straight to the heart of an exhibition that we worked on in 2018. Immortalized was about who we commemorate in the public realm, and equally importantly, who we don't commemorate. It's worth noting at this point, a bit of an aside, that this exhibition happened before the murder of George Floyd and the removal of many Confederate statues in the US and the removal of the slave trader Edward Colston statue in the UK. I think these events would have certainly influenced the exhibition. But the exhibition itself revealed these surprising stories of public remembrance and kind of laid open current debates about the removal and reinterpretation of contested sites, encouraging visitors to think about aspects of the built environment they might normally overlook, and inviting proposals for alternative approaches to public commemoration. There's no straightforward narrative on offer here, as even the most immovable monument or memorial can be read in a host of different ways. It's a complex and very divisive subject. Our curatorial approach therefore focused on kind of distilling the complexity and being deliberately provocative. To do this, we created statements and sketches to communicate the complexity of the issue, to provoke reaction and to prompt debate. Here is one of them. If you see the one on the left here, you see Francis Crick receiving his Nobel Peace Prize. But in his shadow, he received that Nobel Peace Prize for his discovery of the structure of DNA. But absence from the podium and seen in his shadow here is Rosalind Franklin. Her X-ray photographs contributed directly to this discovery and was used by Francis Crick. So you can see our idea here was to involve audiences by provoking them into questioning everything, inviting them themselves to create these new alternative ideas. We're trying to sort of make connections, build empathy. And to me, the approach here in making connections and building empathy are the building blocks to making things matter, to making them relevant. And it's this thinking that's inspired a new model or manifesto for interpretation we're going to talk about today. I think everything I've said so far demands new ways of thinking about interpretation, a paradigm shift in how we interpret. And so I'm going to end with this manifesto for transformation. I'm advocating new models of practice that recognize kind of increasingly diverse discipline that is interpretation. I think if we want to change people, places, and even the world, our work must be transformative. And what are the key tools for us to be transformative? Well, the first thing is we've got to be relevant. We've got to make things matter for our audience. We do this, what have I been talking about making connections by being inventive and provocative, empathetic and enchanting. Like a good storyteller, an interpreter understands the feelings and perspectives of their audiences, and then uses that understanding to create moments that resonate, moments that inspire. At the same time, we've got to create challenging experiences, use our platforms to set the agenda, bring untold histories and new perspectives to light. We must also kind of harness debate and controversy and provoke new ways of thinking and affect real change. When you make your subject relevant to your audience, it will resonate with them and absorb them and captivate them in this state of flow. We also need to tell stories. Humans, we're natural storytellers. We make sense of the world and ourselves through narrative. It's a hardwired kind of human instinct. It's a perfect way to reach audiences. Stories have this transformative power. They enable us to impart information, that they spark cognition and emotion. They lead to understanding and meaning. And as interpreters, we should view our craft as storytelling in real and in digital realms, of course, through exhibits and art installations on digital platforms. These are our modern day stages, our books, our campfires. And like stories down the ages, the ones we tell as interpreters should have the ambition to influence and affect change, to challenge prejudices, to change behaviors, to regenerate places, connect communities, create a more equitable society. And our cultural institutions and our landscapes, they're full of stories. It's our duty and our role to tell them, making sure they're heard within and beyond the walls of our places. So how do we do it? Well, that's the philosophy kind of behind the manifesto that I've given you, but I'm now going to tell you probably the most important part, which is the key, the method, the how we're going to do it. It's long been my view that we as interpreters, and our clients in our industry go about creating exhibitions in quite a convoluted way. We put the value in the wrong phases during design development, such as develop design and technical design. These phases often take a big story and dissect and deconstruct and reassemble, and you kind of lose a bit of the sense of the story and a sense of the magic. So I believe we need to rethink this. For me, the two most important phases of any project are the concept, the big idea where the narrative is formed, and the production phase where the ideas come to life. See a future where we have much more compressed process with a greater emphasis on concept, and then skip it to production. It's a bit like making a film. You start with the script and the treatment, the concept. Then you cast and you the film and you plan it. These are our compressed design phases. They're more procedural, they're less creative, and then you produce, and that's where the magic happens. In fact, I think this kind of rethought process is already becoming a reality as digital really demands this way of. We also need to rethink and broaden what we see as our roles, what we view as our community. Interpretation is a promiscuous discipline, it already is. I think we need to open it up still further to include the professions whose expertise we often draw on: researchers, activists, audience engagers, curators, designers, architects, project managers, and producers. We are more than the glue that links these professions. We are them and they are us. We also need to take inspiration from a range of other skills and disciplines, new expertise, theatre, film, gaming, the music industry. With multiple authors, a museum exhibition could have an almost unlimited potential to contain multiple points of view and perspectives, all held together by the unifying power of story, the story we're telling, and it's our skill as interpreters to give it coherence. So we need to be a signpost. So former UK Member of Parliament Tony Benn, some of you will be familiar with him. He once described there's two types of politicians, the signpost and the weather vane. Some, and I think we'll probably all name a few, swing with the prevailing mood. They're ready to give up everything they believe in to get into power. They're the weather vane. Others are conviction politicians. They stick with their beliefs, even if it costs them their job or their popularity. They're the signposts. Interpreters should be signposts. Understand and carry with you the audience motivations. This should be part of your thinking, but to paraphrase kind of Steve Jobs, you can't give the customers what they want, and then you can't ask the customers what they want and then just give it to them. On a project, you attend the focus groups, you read the audience research, you speak to the communities, you extend your thinking and your knowledge, but don't just respond to these. Surprise them. You're the inventor, you're the interpreter. You use your knowledge and understanding to give people what they need, not just what they want. Be a signpost, not a weather vane. Steve Jobs also actually said creativity is all about connecting things. And a kind of century earlier, the mathematician Henri Poincaré put it another way. He felt that to create consists of making new complicated which are useful. And the pioneer of this kind of associative rule of thinking is Professor Sarnoff Mednick in his 1962 paper, The Associative Basis of the Creative Process. For Mednick, an essential feature of productive thought, whether you're Coleridge or whether you're Einstein, is combinatory play, inquiring in different activities, disciplines, or lines of thought to free your mind, to make unexpected but productive associations. Like any creative act, interpretation is about making those types of connection. It's what I call synthesis. Synthesis is about finding and exploring unsuspected kinships between facts and feelings. I'm going to give you an example, which is why these horses are here. Well, these are huge equine sculptures. They're in Falkirk in Scotland. They're not horses. They're called kelpies, and they're shape-shifting creatures of Scottish mythology. And they're amazing artworks that they're there, and you should Google kelpies after this. And they straddle a huge new park and the motorway in Falkirk. Alongside them is a visitor centre. And we had a brief for the visitor centre to tell the story of Falkirk, which has an incredible history. And yeah, that's fine, but hold on, there's these two massive horse artworks outside. So how are we going to make sense of that? Well, our inspiration within the visitor centre was a really witty corporate film. It was about a Scottish textile company called Pringle. They make jumpers and socks. You've probably seen a lot of golf players wear them. And this film was made by another artist with Scottish connections, David Shrigley. And it kind of inspired us when we saw the irreverence of this film to create a kind of fun, irreverent, kind of illustrative timeline and animation that told the shape-shifting story of Falkirk and featured the Kelpies through time. And so the result was actually an artwork in its own right, a kind of tapestry that we created telling this story. We synthesized the Kelpies with Shrigley to create this new artwork, which contrasted from Scott's artwork completely, but also complemented it as well. But of course, synthesis is not a guaranteed formula for success, nor is it, I think, a deliberate or formulaic process. It can take place in any point, brainstorming with a team, riding your bike. It can be individualistic, it can be collective. But what I'd have plead with you is within your lives and within your interpretive planning process, be aware of it. Be aware of the power of association and synthesis and embrace it. The output can be truly inventive. The most elegant interpretive solutions, whether in art and science, I think are based on one big idea, an idea that distills complexity and that people remember. Think back to the Blink exhibit I described right at the beginning of this talk. This is what I mean about, when I say sort of finding singularity, and I feel interpretation requires it. Singularity is about finding the big idea, the concept that kind of memorably defines a project or a place. It's indivisible and should be elegant and should kind of combine the message and the medium. It's a single thing, but its spirit permeates an entire place. It's arrived at not by looking through objectives and audiences and themes and heritage significance and media output in any order, but it's about combining these complex elements and distilling them into a single idea that embraces them all. It's about discovering the singular simplicity of a perfect exhibit that resonates with the past, fills a present, anticipates a future. This is singular. As interpreters, we should also be creating experiences that feed not just the mind, but also the body and all the senses. I think experiences that are alive, participatory, that reveal things from different perspectives. Working across digital and physical realms, the palette of techniques at our disposal is endless. Our exhibits always aim for this kind of multimodal experience. Narratives are constructed through the interaction of written language, graphics, images, audio, 3D, sound and touch. Ensuring these all work in concert and that they impact the whole sensorium is the skill and responsibility of the interpreter. I think we're more like kind of composers or conductors in this regard. But as with music, it's important to remember that silence can be a really powerful tool. There are times when we just should do nothing except let an object, a place or an event speak for itself. I think some places, some artifacts have a power beyond human subjectivities. Thinking the impossible, I think, is a great habit just for us all to get into. Impossible encourages risk-taking, it fosters invention, and it ultimately leads to new paradigms in planning and managing culture. To paraphrase NASA, on our way to the impossible, we might find something eminently doable. If you want to create experiences that visitors can't see or do anywhere else, be brave and do the unexpected. Take risks. Every advance requires risk. Sometimes the only way to invent new experiences, spark debate, attract hard-to-reach audiences, move the profession forward is by taking risks. And finally, through all of this, important to remember why you're doing it and to ask yourself why you're doing it. Remind yourself of that. It will give you a moral compass when things get a bit difficult. Interpretation can help change the lives of individuals. Remember Professor Brian Greene as a boy standing there in the planetarium. Interpretation can build places from new cultural institutions to nations. It can support communities. It can tackle global issues. It can deliver cultural projects that help us better understand our world, provide us with opportunities to act on what we see and to imagine alternative futures for our planet. And kind of by sharing stories that challenge stereotypes and promoting exclusiveness, empathy and understanding, I think our work as interpreters can help create a more just and a more equitable world. Interpretation done well, I think, does give culture the power to transform our minds, our communities, our places and our planet. So thank you, and I look forward to some questions and such. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric. And I'm sure there's people clapping virtually. Maybe we can show some appreciation. Yeah, but Eric, that's a wonderfully stimulating presentation, Eric, and I think really shows some excellence in thinking there in terms of promoting new ideas. And there are some good questions coming out from the chat and the Q&A, so I will do my best to put them to you. There was definitely two questions which were around the theme, perhaps harking back to that singularity that you picked up on, of how things might be overwhelming. So Frank asked early in the talk about whether the Qatar Museum was overwhelming with a number of different voices, and how perhaps you found a route through that. And also Edith also asked at 7:26 on the chat how you create a story out of such a huge sensory experience. So I suppose the question is, how did you apply your principles to somewhere like Qatar, if you could, depending on how you were involved? And if not, how would you comment on such a big, awe-inspiring, overwhelming sensory experience being picked up? How did you get your story through that, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does. I think I'll give it through sort of two examples of the exhibits and the approach that we did. First, we really wanted with the National Museum, we wanted it to be like you were walking through a kind of oral and visual history. So using the walls of each of the galleries to, in effect, create an atmosphere. So we commissioned art filmmakers to, in a way, create the introduction for what that gallery was about. So you knew before, you didn't have to read or anything like that. You knew you were walking into a space that was about natural history, or was about archaeology. And because you had created this atmosphere, and it was an atmosphere in which the other exhibits within that space could respond to. But the narrative itself was led by the voices of our whole history of the oral histories which we created. So the museum took hundreds and hundreds of hours of oral histories and weaved it together. So whatever gallery you were in, you could either hear experts talking about archaeological findings, or you could hear communities talking about their particular lives. And that was the dominant voice that you could hear throughout, and that helped shape and structure the narrative. And the oral histories were seen very much as part of the collection. In fact, probably the most prized collection. And in a way, other exhibits and collections were brought to life by them. So I hope that helps explain some of the methods that we use.
It does, yeah. And there was another theme coming out, which I think Edith picked up on the chat there at 7:53. And also was asked by Jasmine, I think, in the Q&A, which is, as an interpreter's role continues to evolve, how can somebody new to the interpreter feel ensure they make their mark and contribute to change? And kind of related from Edith, I'm interested in how you get to the story, decide what is the narrative before you even begin to represent it. So I think we've chatted before, haven't you, about the ideas-led interpretation, and rather than starting with your collection, starting with your narrative. But how do you get to that? And also, how can someone new to the interpretive field ensure that they contribute to that and learn those skills?
Yeah, I mean, it's every project is different, but I'd say that a lot of the projects that I've worked on, I've been lucky enough to work on, are very narrative based. So often where there is a collection, they're seen within the confines of a story. The most I also, firmly believe that people connect to stories, whether it's a story that might live on an object label, whether it's a huge narrative that a whole exhibition is part of. And so the starting point for any exhibition is trying to work out what that story it is, and almost to curate that, because you can't tell. I mean, this is the bit that Tilden was completely right. You can't tell everything, but you must look at you must look to tell a particular story you think is going to resonate with those particular audiences, and think of what that arc of that story is. And I always start at that point. I don't necessarily start at a point where I'm thinking of messages and themes, etc. I'm actually thinking more of, I'm thinking of it more in line as a film director, or more of a script. And we like to involve script writers, or the thinking of script writers, very early on in the thinking of how to articulate that story. And part of what I was trying to say was that if you do have a story in an interpretive plan, this story gets realized sometimes way down the line by people that are producing the showcases or the films or the interactives. Sometimes the interpretive planner is not part of that. Sometimes they are. I'm trying to compress that process. I'm trying to make the producers themselves at the end are actually interpreters. We are actually producers. And I'm trying to ensure that that story is as good and as well told as it was right at the beginning, at the end, and likewise, because and is not being chopped up and sliced by all the different people that are involved, getting paid to do all those different things. So for me, the most important thing is keeping hold of what the great idea was at the beginning, making sure that it is very kind of clear, and then ensuring that it's realized there at the end. Yeah.
Fantastic. We're running out of time, but I just want to get this question in. It's might be no surprise to you, but it's working in places like Qatar and the UAE. Did you find that you were put under any sort of pressure to tell a particular story? The question from an anonymous questioner at 7:32 is, how can we possibly believe the stories these examples tell are honest? So I suppose it's really your experience of working in these places and whether you find, especially on a national museum, which is telling a very a national story of pride. Was that the case? I haven't been to the museum, and were you put on, were you lent on even in a kind of brief way? I suppose you will need to tell the story in a particular way, or did that not happen?
I would say no more than in any other place that you work with, where people may give you a brief or a particular steer. I think what I was trying to say at the beginning, that it's the responsibility of curators and interpreters, it's our professional responsibility to tell a story that is inclusive, that is honest, and to push our clients when we're not comfortable. So there was never any sort of direct pressure in any way. And in fact, the story came from completely consultation with many communities. Whenever we work in new places, we always employ, as part of our team, as well as people that have been brought up there, nationals from those places, to help inform our thinking. So it's not like this is the best way to tell a story. We, as a collective, we try and understand that, and we use that to script. So I would say no, not any more than in any other place. And I really feel that museums and cultural projects are really important platforms wherever I work around the world, to elicit change in different ways, whether it's with the people you work with or through the stories you tell. And many of the museums we've done in many of the countries around the world we've evaluated and have successfully helped push and change and open debates that other, within the press, other people don't have that opportunity. So I think if I leave anyone with, we've got an amazing opportunity as interpreters to help shift thinking around the world. So let's harness this opportunity, and let's use it to connect ourselves across the world, but make the world a better place.
Thank you. I think that's a lovely sort of place to finish, and thank you again from AHI's perspective for coming forward and sharing such stimulating ideas. And I think I'm sorry to those of you in the chat who asked questions that we couldn't get around to, but hopefully we've had a bit of discussion. We could go on all night, of course. But yeah, you'll see lots of appreciation there, Eric, for your talk, and hopefully people will take away those ideas and perhaps use them in their interpretive practice. So thank you very much. And I would now like to pass back to Chuck.
Great, thanks.
Thank you so much, Eric and Jim, for bringing us a perspective that is just fascinating. And thanks to the Association for Heritage Interpretation. Our next webinar is on April 20th, hosted by Interp Europe, and we look forward to seeing you at that webinar.